simple because there's a plaque on the front there that says the birthplace of William Shakespeare. But we're not 100% certain about this, to be perfectly honest. The trouble was John Shakespeare had two houses here in Stratford, not one. One of them was certainly here. We think probably the east wing of their house here, which is the gable, this last gable here. These triangular things called gables. But he had another one in Greenhill Street as well, which is just off the Cattle Market there. We hope and we pray that the birthplace was here, not Greenhill Street, because that really makes a mess of things. But we can't prove that he was actually born here. But he certainly could have been. He was certainly brought up here. There's no doubt about that. The problem we have is that we know John Shakespeare was living here in 1552. He's in the archives because he was fined 12 pence for creating a dunghill outside his house. He just chucked his slops out the window. This is a man who's going to go on to be bailiff, so obviously he got his act together later on. But I don't suppose many people noticed. But there was a dunghill outside. The council did notice, and they fined him. But we don't know, and we know he was renting at the time. He was renting off a man called West. He bought it off that man 4 years later. So we know in 1556 that the Shakespeares owned that end of the house. We don't know that he bought anything else until about 1575, which was well after the dates where Shakespeare was born. So he could easily have been born on the east wing. If you look at the just above the sill, the porch there, that window on Americans call the second floor, what we call the first floor, that is the room that is designated as the birth room. Well, that's rubbish. So he wasn't born there because unless Shakespeare was actually John Shakespeare was renting all this area when Shakespeare was born. But why? It was only him and his, Mary Ard and his wife. There was no. They'd had two children, but they both died in infancy, Margaret and Joan. So the Shakespeare, William Shakespeare, was the first of their children that actually survived. So there was absolutely no need for a big house. The little one would have been fine. And they've got a tannery out the back as well to show that what he was doing to make his gloves. And they've now got set up a sort of glove-making factory, as it were, on the ground floor. And there's no doubt that he sold a lot of his gloves and what have you out of the window. That's when it wasn't market day. When it was market day, we went to the market where Barclays Bank is now, that white building at the end of the street there. That is, there was the market was built over the top of the market. And that was, the Glovers had pride of place here in Stratford. And that would be where he would sell, he would do most of his business at the market there a couple of times a week. I mean, theoretically, it was only 4 times a year, but in fact, we were doing it a couple of times a week. And this house, well, we think it was built for Mr. West. We're not absolutely certain about that, but we bought this for Mr. West in 1520s, 1530s, something like that. And it hasn't had many different named owners in this house over the years. Because, I'm sure you all know your Shakespeare genealogy, but he had the 3 children, Susanna, the elder daughter, and then the twins, Judith and Hamlet. And Hamlet dies at the age of 11. Judith marries a man called Thomas Quiney. They have 3 children. The eldest was called Shakespeare Quiney, but died within a year of birth. The other 2 died in their, one at 20 and one at 22. Before they got married, no children. So through Judith, the line dies out. Susanna marries the doctor here in Stratford, John Hall. They have 1 daughter, Elizabeth, and Elizabeth also dies childless. So the line through Susanna dies out as well. So, and what happens after Shakespeare, of course, leaves everything to the next of kin, but he makes sure that he's the only sibling that outlives him. Is a sister also called Joan. It's the second Joan. The first one died in infancy. This is another Joan. She outlives him, married a man called Hart, William Hart. And Shakespeare knows when he's writing his will that William Hart is about to die. And in fact, he dies just a few days before Shakespeare dies. And he puts a bit in his will to make sure that Joan Hart is looked after. And how does he do it? He says she can live in the west wing of the house here for a penny a month. And you think, what a nice guy, just looking after his widowed sister. But by that time, Shakespeare was just wallowing in money. He could easily have given it to her. He wasn't living here by now. He was living in a new place. So, he didn't need this anymore. In fact, this bit of the area was put over to the Maidenhead Inn. So it was a pub. She had to live next to the pub. The irony of it is that Joan Hart, because Elizabeth dies, everything gets left to the next of kin, and the next of kin is the grandchildren of Joan Hart. So the Harts end up owning the whole shooting match, not just here, but all the rest of it as well. They sell most of it off, but they keep this house for a couple of hundred years, and then the last of the Stratford Harts sells it to a man called Court, Thomas Court. Thomas Court's widow sells it to the Birthplace Trust. So not very many different named owners of the house over 500 years. And the Birthplace Trust, when they took over in 1847, they took down the housing, because this all used to be terraced housing, not on a burgage plot because of the gill pits behind here, so there wasn't enough room for burgage plots, so it's terraced housing really. And they took down either side of the terraced housing to preserve the birthplace. We just hope they pulled down the right ones. That's all.